The sun rose gently over the hills of Saroa, casting honey-colored light across the red earth. It was a day the village had awaited for months, the day President Ibrahim Traoré would visit their province for the first time since taking office. The roads had been swept. The elders had rehearsed their greetings. Children had been dressed in their finest uniforms to sing songs of unity and strength. A brass band warmed up by the market fountain, each note swallowed by the chatter of excited villagers. Dancers lined the road in rows, ankle bells and beads catching the morning light. Women carried platters of steaming stew and grilled tilapia to the assembly tent. The air was alive with promise. But just past the outer edge of the crowd, where the gravel met the dust, a boy stood barefoot. No one had noticed him arrive. His clothes were loose and faded, too thin for the early chill. His hair was braided unevenly, and his skin bore strange markings, white, jagged lines like lightning that stretched from his wrist to his collarbone. He held no sign, no drum, no flag. Only a small calabash tied with blue string. And when a soldier approached him, asking for his name, the boy replied in a voice that was calm but hauntingly clear. "Tell the lion not to feast while the earth still trembles." The guard frowned, unsure if it was a joke or some local saying. But before he could question further, the boy turned and walked toward the market, weaving through the crowd with the silence of smoke. At the heart of the square, the elders assembled near the shaded platform where President Traoré was expected to speak. The mayor, a proud man with a deep voice and polished shoes, rehearsed his opening welcome in a whisper. No one noticed when the boy slipped between two women selling okra. No one paid him any mind as he sat beside the stone base of the fountain, his calabash in his lap. Until the drums stopped. A ripple of silence spread like a windless fire. People turned. The motorcade had arrived. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped down from his vehicle with no armed guard flanking him. He wore traditional Faso Dan Fani, and his stride was measured but open. He shook hands, smiled easily, and nodded respectfully at the village griot who began reciting a poem of welcome. Just as the griot's voice rose into praise, the boy stood. "Even the eagle forgets," he said loudly. "Until the wind reminds him of his weight." The griot faltered. Heads turned. The boy's voice was not loud, but it cut through the ceremony like a blade through silk. The president paused. Villagers began to murmur. Some laughed nervously. Others shushed the boy, waving him away. A man from the district council whispered harshly, "Who let this street child wander in?" But Ibrahim Traoré raised a hand, not to command silence, but to wait. His eyes had found the boy, now stepping calmly toward the platform. "Come," the president said simply. The boy did not hesitate. He approached until they stood face to face, man and child, power and mystery, silence and thunder. "What's your name?" Ibrahim asked. The boy tilted his head. "Names are for those who wish to be remembered. I only came to be heard." "And what would you have me hear?" The boy looked toward the crowd, then up at the mountain behind them. He pointed with one finger toward the peak, where clouds had begun to gather though no rain was forecast. "The mountain remembers what the village forgets. The path of the dead does not like to be stepped on twice." It was nonsense to some. Poetry to others. But to Ibrahim, something in the phrasing struck bone. He studied the boy for a long moment. Then asked, "Did someone send you to say this?" The boy lowered his gaze to the ground. "No one sends thunder. It comes when silence has gone on too long." Before anyone could react, the boy turned and walked away. This time, the crowd parted for him without a word. He disappeared down the alley behind the fishmonger's stall and was gone. The griot, now shaken, asked softly, "Shall I continue, sir?" Ibrahim Traoré didn't answer. His eyes were still on the alley. Then he looked toward the mountain, where a single low rumble echoed through the clouds. No one else seemed to hear it. But he did. And the next day, he would not return to the capital. That night, the village of Saroa slept beneath uneasy clouds. Though no storm broke, thunder rolled faintly from the mountains as if the sky were murmuring secrets only a few could hear. Inside the modest guest house where President Ibrahim Traoré had chosen to stay, refusing the luxury estate prepared by regional leaders, lamplight flickered against the mud brick walls. He sat at a small wooden desk, a cold cup of tea forgotten beside a folded map. His eyes had not moved from the corner of the room, where the boy's words echoed like the riddle of a fire no one had seen, but everyone could smell. The mountain remembers what the village forgets. His military advisor, Colonel Duka, paced beside him. "Sir, I insist we secure the perimeter tomorrow. This village is full of theatrics. It's how they seek attention. And this boy, clearly a lunatic." Traoré didn't answer. He tapped the table twice, slowly. Then asked, "Did anyone find him?" "No, sir." He vanished. Again. Like a ghost. "Ghosts don't leave footprints," Traoré muttered. "And I saw his in the dust." A knock interrupted them. The village priest entered, visibly shaken. He clutched an old leather pouch and bowed deeply before speaking. "I apologize for disturbing you, Excellency, but I believe I must share something with you, something I buried long ago." Traoré nodded. "Go on." The priest opened the pouch and removed a faded parchment. On it was sketched an image, crude but recognizable, a child with scars along both arms, curved like lightning bolts. Around the child were cryptic symbols, and beneath it, a line of ancestral script translated loosely. "When the boy with thunder on his skin speaks thrice, listen. For the sky will split after the third." Traoré sat forward. "I was just a young acolyte," the priest continued, "when I found this scroll hidden in the base of the altar. The elders called it superstition, banned it. Said it would bring panic. But today, I saw the scars with my own eyes." Duka scoffed. "Sir, this is madness. We are in the 21st century. Then perhaps we've outpaced our wisdom," Traoré replied softly. The priest bowed again. "Excellency, the prophecy warns not just of a sky split with storms, but of a betrayal that would begin it. A betrayal from within." Silence fell. Traoré's fingers tightened around the scroll. Then he dismissed both men with a nod, thanking them. When they were gone, he stared out the window, eyes tracing the dark outline of the mountain. Somewhere out there, that boy had walked away into the night. Alone. Unafraid. Carrying riddles that stirred something older than fear. The next morning, the village resumed its performances, though with less vigor. The soldiers stood more alert. The dancers moved with eyes cast to the hills. President Traoré cancelled the parade. Instead, he requested to walk the market alone. "No escorts," he told Colonel Duka. "No spectacle. I came to listen. Let me." Reluctantly, Duka agreed. So Ibrahim walked. Past fruit stalls and blacksmiths, past storytellers and gourd carvers. And though people smiled and bowed, he noticed how many avoided his gaze. As if they feared what he might see in them. Then, beside the well, he saw her. An old woman, hunched, with a milky eye and a basket of herbs. She was staring directly at him. "You seek the boy," she said before he could speak. He nodded. She reached into her basket and handed him a small item, a pebble. But it was smooth, round, and glowing faintly with pale light. "He left this," she whispered. "Before the drums yesterday. Said you'd come." "What does it mean?" he asked. She smiled without joy. "It means the mountain has opened its mouth. But you must decide if you'll listen, or wait to be swallowed." He thanked her, but she turned away before he could ask more. That afternoon, news arrived. A rider from the northern outpost, bloodied, wide-eyed, hoarse, collapsed at the gates of Saroa. The guards rushed him inside. When Ibrahim reached the field hospital, the rider barely had strength to speak. "Sir, the border, it's breached. Not by rebels. Not mercenaries. It's them." "Who?" asked the president, kneeling beside him. The rider's lips trembled. "They wear the black horn. The old emblem. The warlord's mark. They're not supposed to exist. The color drained from Ibrahim's face. The black horn hadn't been seen in 12 years. It belonged to a faction disbanded after the revolution. A faction that had once fought beside Kando, Traoré's top general. The prophecy. The betrayal. The sky preparing to split. Suddenly, the boy's first riddle came back with bone-deep clarity. Tell the lion not to feast while the earth still trembles. That night, Ibrahim summoned General Kando. When he arrived, draped in medals, the president asked him only one question. Did you know this would happen? Kando hesitated. Then smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes, Your Excellency, the soil must be turned before crops can grow again. Ibrahim stared at him. And what do you plant, with a knife in your hand? Kando said nothing. That night, Ibrahim did not sleep. By morning, the skies over Saroa no longer carried whispers, they glared with silent weight, clouds sagging like an omen unspoken. Word of the northern breach had not yet spread to the villagers, but in the presidential compound, the air was thick with unasked questions and unsaid truths. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone at the foot of the old baobab tree in the village square. This was where the boy had first spoken his warning. The branches above him twisted like fingers holding the sky in place. But even this ancient tree looked uneasy beneath the darkening clouds. Colonel Duka approached quietly. Sir, our scouts confirm it. 2 companies. Unmarked vehicles, old black horn flags. Advancing south. Estimated time to reach this province, 3 days. Traoré didn't answer. Instead, he asked, where is General Kando? He left at first light. Said he was heading to Fort Zaga to prepare defenses. And you believed him? Duka hesitated. No, sir. I didn't. The village priest returned later that morning with another scroll, this one torn, half-burnt, saved from the temple fire years ago. He spread it on the floor before Ibrahim. On it, a crude image, a serpent curled around a mountain, its eye glowing like a sun. When the mountain's mouth opens, the priest read aloud, and a fork-tongued brother sings of peace, thunder will ride a child's back. Traoré stared at the drawing. Then whispered, it's not a warning about the sky. It's a warning about us. That afternoon, the markets were full again, but not of celebration. Whispers moved like ash on the wind. Some said a military coup was coming. Others claimed the boy was a spirit sent by the ancestors. A few believed it was all coincidence. But when the boy appeared again, this time beside the schoolhouse, speaking quietly to the children, none dared call him mad. He stood with his bare feet in the sand and said, a house that forgets its fire was once lit by stolen wood, will burn again. One child asked what that meant. He smiled gently. It means your leaders were once shadows. The teacher who overheard burst into tears. President Traoré called an emergency council. Just 6 trusted ministers remained. Everyone else, governors, military envoys, even the mayor of Saroa, had fled or gone silent. Traoré looked at them and said, we are no longer deciding policy. We are deciding memory. What do we want remembered of us, in the days after this storm? They looked at him, some nodding. One wept. Then he raised the pebble the boy had left, the one glowing faintly in his hand. It is said that thunder comes when silence lasts too long. I have been silent, watching loyalty like a man watches a snake under a bed. But no more. He stood. I will go to the people. Tonight. I will speak to them without guards, without lies. And I will find that boy. Because he saw what I refused to. As twilight stretched over Saroa, the villagers gathered beneath the baobab tree, drawn by word of mouth. No music, no drums, just the quiet gathering of faces lit by lanterns and unease. President Traoré stepped into the middle. No podium. No microphone. Just him. He began with only 4 words. We are being lied to. A gasp. A murmur. Silence. He spoke of the black horn. Of the military betrayal. Of the boy. Of the scrolls. Of his own failure to heed the first warning. He pointed to the mountains. From there comes a storm, not just of sky, but of blood, unless we listen. And then, as if summoned, the boy emerged again. From the crowd. Alone. No one stopped him. He walked into the circle of light, barefoot, scarred, and unblinking. Traoré looked down at him. "What do we do now?" the president asked. The boy turned slowly, his eyes scanning the faces of the villagers, women clutching babies, men holding tools instead of weapons, elders with walking sticks like staff-bearing prophets. Then he spoke, quiet but sharp. "You cannot stop the flood. But you can choose which seeds survive it." The president knelt beside him. "Then tell me," he said, "how do we plant them?" The boy stepped forward and placed a hand over the president's heart. "First," he said, "you take off your armor." Traoré removed the sash from his shoulder and laid it on the ground. The boy nodded once. Then thunder cracked. Not a roll, but a split, sharp, clear, terrifying. The sky lit up for only a second, but in that flash, every villager saw it. A jagged line of fire on the mountain. A signal. A warning. Or perhaps, the beginning. That night, the villagers did not sleep. The air in Saroa had changed, heavy, charged, sacred. Children were hushed, fires were kept low, and the baobab tree at the center of the square had become something more than wood. It was now a silent witness. A place where prophecy had cracked open the throat of a nation and made it speak. President Ibrahim Traoré stood by the window of his guesthouse, arms crossed, listening to the wind howl through the shutters like an old man crying in riddles. Across the room, the boy sat on the floor, his eyes closed, humming something that didn't belong to this generation. "It was a song my mother used to sing," he said quietly. "Before they burned her for seeing what others wouldn't." Traoré turned. "You said this would happen. You said it 3 times. The betrayal. The mountain. The fire in the sky." The boy opened his eyes. "And still, you stayed. Because running is for those without a country." The boy nodded solemnly. Then added, "So is silence." Before Traoré could respond, the door burst open. Marie, his closest aide and longtime confidant, stepped in breathless. "Sir, it's begun. Fort Zaga fell at midnight. The Black Horns are marching fast. Kando has declared himself protector of the north. He sent a message to the people of Saroa, surrender or burn." Traoré clenched his jaw. "And the army?" Marie shook her head. "Fractured. Some loyal. Many confused. Most, waiting to see which way the wind turns." He turned back to the boy. "You knew this. Didn't you?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked slowly toward the window. "The sky does not shout at the mountain," he said. "It simply rains until it breaks." By sunrise, the clouds had gathered like teeth above the village. The villagers lined the roads, not with weapons, but with resolve. Women passed out millet cakes and tea. Young men painted symbols on their forearms, an old emblem once used by the resistance, 2 hands open, facing the sky. President Traoré stood before them, dressed not in military garb, but in plain cloth. He carried no gun. No flag. Beside him, the boy clutched the calabash from the first day. It now held something strange, smooth black stones, each etched with marks no one recognized. He whispered, "They carry the memory of thunder." At the edge of the crowd, the village priest raised a staff carved with ancestor symbols and began to chant. One by one, others joined in. A wave of ancient rhythm spread. It was not a war song. It was something older. A remembering. That afternoon, the first scouts of Kando's force arrived. They halted at the ridge, overlooking Saroa. Something about the scene below unsettled them, not because the people looked threatening, but because they didn't look afraid. And fear is what Kando expected to conquer. Instead, he found quiet resistance. A village already decided. When Kando himself appeared on the ridge, riding in a black jeep with the old insignia on his shoulder, the boy stepped forward. Alone. He walked past the village, past the guards, up the road, toward the line of soldiers with rifles and painted faces. People gasped. "Bring him back," someone cried. But Traoré raised a hand. "No. Let him speak." And he did. The boy stopped at the edge of the ridge, looked directly at General Kando, and spoke without shouting. "The lion who drinks from the poison stream does not die from thirst, but from forgetting where the river begins." Kando laughed. "You come alone, child? With proverbs instead of warriors?" The boy tilted his head. "You're not afraid of me." "You're afraid that he is," he said, pointing to one of Kando's own officers. The crowd went still. One of Kando's lieutenants stepped back. Eyes wide. Hand trembling. The boy stepped forward again. "I know what you dream, Captain. Of your sister who died in the last war. Of how Kando sent her squad into the valley to make a point. I know what you heard him say when the radios were off." The captain's face went pale. "You don't know anything." Kando barked. "I know that your name means truth," the boy said to the captain. "And you have not spoken it in years." Then he turned and walked back toward the village. Behind him, silence. Then movement. 3 soldiers dropped their rifles. 2 others removed their insignias. Kando shouted, cursed, drew his pistol, but no one followed his command. That night, lightning split the sky again. And this time, it struck. The tree at the top of the ridge, an old marker between Saroa and the north, was cleaved in 2. No rain. Just fire. Just thunder. Inside the village, the boy sat beside the president, dipping a stone into a bowl of water. Traoré asked him, "What happens now?" The boy looked up, calm as ever. "Now, the soil drinks." The morning after the lightning strike, Saroa awoke not to gunfire, but to birdsong. The sky was pale and clean, as though the storm had taken something with it when it passed, something heavy and dark that no longer belonged. At the ridge, General Kando's soldiers were gone. Some had laid down their arms, others had simply walked into the hills and vanished. Kando himself had not been seen since the night the boy spoke his name and shook his men with a truth deeper than bullets. Whispers said he fled east. Others claimed the earth swallowed him whole. President Ibrahim Traoré stood barefoot on the same ridge, beside the charred remains of the old tree, staring across the land that had nearly been lost. With him was the boy, still silent, still holding the calabash. But something had changed in the way he walked, lighter, as if he had delivered a burden that was never his to keep. Villagers gathered behind them. Marie approached with the first wave of returning soldiers, most of them young and unsure, their uniforms wrinkled, their rifles slung low in shame. "We waited for orders," one of them said, trembling. "But we didn't know what was true anymore." Traoré nodded, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then let today be your truth. Start again. Not with obedience. With honor." The boy stepped forward, dipped his fingers into the calabash, and touched the soldier's forehead. Just once. A symbol. Not of power, of memory. By week's end, Traoré called for a national gathering. But not in the capital. He chose Saroa. And there, beneath a canvas canopy, surrounded by elders, children, market women, and recovering soldiers, he spoke. No teleprompters. No flags. Just a single object in his hand, the glowing pebble the boy had given him. The one that had never stopped pulsing. This, he said, holding it up, was left in the hand of an old woman. A woman no minister consulted. A woman no cameras followed. But she heard thunder before we saw it. And she passed it on. To me. To you. He placed the pebble into a bowl of water. It sank gently, ripples spreading. We were nearly broken. Not by guns. Not by traitors. but by forgetting how to listen. He turned to the boy. This child, he continued, was called mad. Called cursed. But he reminded us what leadership without humility becomes: blindness. The boy stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. He looked small, ordinary, until he opened his mouth. The sky doesn't strike to destroy. It strikes to warn. He raised the calabash. And those who carry water must learn when to pour it, and when to let the rain fall. In the months that followed, something shifted across the country. Not just in policy, but in posture. President Traoré established the Council of Thunder, a gathering of youth, elders, and spiritual leaders who met monthly to speak without rank. Each session began with a riddle, and ended with a silence long enough to remind them why they'd gathered. The calabash was placed in the National Museum, not behind glass, but in the center of a circle of stools, where children were encouraged to sit, listen, and speak. Villages that once waited for government aid began building listening houses, open huts with drums, mats, and storytellers, places where farmers and orphans could come, say their fears, share their truths. Traoré's monthly addresses now ended not with slogans, but with borrowed words. You cannot stop the flood. But you can choose which seeds survive it. As for the boy, he was never given a title. He refused one. He lived with the woman who'd first offered him water, now healed and walking with strength again. Together, they planted trees at the edges of villages, marking places where people had once been ignored. He rarely spoke in public again. But when he did, people listened. One day, a journalist from abroad came, hoping for an interview. The boy smiled and said, "Do you speak to your shadows before you chase them away?" The journalist said nothing. The interview never happened. But the moment did. Years later, President Traoré would retire, not as a ruler clinging to the past, but as a man who had learned to step aside when the sky grew quiet again. At his final address, he stood in a simple courtyard, now surrounded by gardens, children's drawings, and murals of open hands. He held the boy's old pebble once more. This was never a prophecy, he said. It was a memory. A reminder of what we forget when we think titles protect us. He looked up at the sky, clear and wide. May we never need thunder again.